Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Mary Van. I am a clinician at ThriveX. We are a functional medicine practice that focuses on rebalancing the body with nutrition. Now, we decided this past week that we wanted to try something called a metabolic reboot. And we were decided that we wanted to do this utilizing a very unique 5-day protocol where we would mimic fasting. For those who are not familiar with the healing power of fasting, it's actually quite simple. Here in the United States, we tend, unfortunately, to graze all day. We really don't take our time to eat. And so, unfortunately, many of us Americans, we end up eating inappropriately. We end up eating too many large meals here, too many large meals there, and then we'll just graze throughout the entire time. And the reason this is a problem is that our body is going to spend so much time digesting food that it's not really going to pay attention to other areas of the body that also needs attention. For example, when you're not digesting your food, your body will be very busy doing things like creating new cells, creating and repairing tissues that may be damaged, or treating areas that may have been cut, wounded, or infected. And we want to have periods of time where we have the ability to do so. And you'll often hear about different protocols that include periods of fasting. For example, 12-3 diets, which is 12 hours of fasting starting 3 hours before you go to bed. The idea that, let's say you go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, your last calorie would be around, say, 7 p.m., which means in about 2 hours it would take your food to digest. It would permit your body to spend the next 10 hours regenerating itself because you will not eat again till 7 a.m. So that is the concept behind the fasting or the intermittent fasting. So we decided we wanted to try a slightly longer type of fasting, which is a 5-day mimic fasting. Now, the mimic fasting is a protocol that is scientifically put together by a Dr. Walter Longo. Dr. Longo is a professor from the University of Southern California who has been involved in biochemistry and the study of longevity for a good 20 plus years. I remember reading his studies when I was in college about how by decreasing caloric intake by as much as 30%, he showed that he could double the life expectancy of laboratory mice. And this is not doing anything else except decreasing their calories by 30%. The mice lived twice as long and were very, very healthy compared to the average lab mice that died years prior. So he created this 5-day protocol, which we followed. And the 5-day protocol is essentially non-GMO, no artificial flavors, no animal products, and that was a big component. It was no animal products. It is completely vegetable based, and what's in this 5-day protocol where each day is given to you in a box. There is soups, there are olives, there are nuts, there's kale, and there's also special types of drinks that are created to help your body overcome the need or the urge, rather, of sugar. So we called this our metabolic reboot because the goal was to limit how much excessive carbohydrates that we were going to put into our bodies. So everyone in our staff did it, and also a couple of our patients joined us as well because we were all curious to see what would happen. We started last Monday, and on Monday the calories were about 1100, so it wasn't anything. We weren't like we were starving ourselves. It was just changing how we ate, when we ate, and what type of foods we were putting into our bodies. And we followed the diet. It wasn't completely easy. There were some rough patches, for example, on day 3, where our stores of carbohydrates, our stores of glucose dropped dramatically. It was very tiring on day 3, but we were all surprised that by day 4 and 5, our energy levels kicked up as we walked out of what was essentially sugar withdrawal. And days 4 and 5, where we weren't really eating that many carbohydrates any longer, our bodies were switching to a ketogenic phase where it was using up different types of stores of energy, and we felt pretty good by day 5. So the next 2 slides is to show you the results of what day 1 looked like compared to day 5, and it's actually pretty exciting. So a lot of people, when they think diets and protocols, they're just thinking about the aesthetics component. We wanted to break it down to both a aesthetics component and also to help you understand how our health changed. So this is an average. The average weight of everyone who tried it was about 157.3 pounds. By day 5, we all had dropped down on average to 148.8. So the average weight loss was about 8.5 pounds in 5 days. More importantly, from a clinical standpoint, is the body fat that changed. Now, in terms of body fat, there are 2 types of body fat. There is subcutaneous body fat. That's the fat that's really on the surface. It's not pretty, but it is what it is. What we are more concerned about is something that's called visceral fat. And visceral fat is fat you don't see. So even a skinny person can have a lot of visceral fat and not realize it. And the visceral fat is actually quite dangerous. Visceral fat is what coats and covers organs. And this type of body fat produces pro-inflammatory agents. And these pro-inflammatory agents can cause everything from heart disease to diabetes because it reduces what's called insulin sensitivity. And it becomes a point of major concern for us, more so than the weight. And in 5 days, we dropped on average a little under 6 pounds of visceral body fat. So that was actually pretty exciting for us, not just because we looked better in our clothes, but also we knew that our body was producing less pro-inflammatory agents. On average, we lost about 1% in body fat, which is pretty impressive considering it's 5 days. From a clinical perspective, I wanted to see what type of metabolic change would occur by doing this mimicking protocol. And what we saw was a very dramatic change in fasting glucose. The fasting glucose on average started around 120 and dropped down to about 73. So that's about a 45-point drop in just 5 days on average. Fasting insulin, how much insulin your body needed to produce to keep your fasting glucose at those levels, dropped down from 16.5 to 6.5. So it dropped down by almost a third. And that number is really important because it tells you that your body didn't have to work as hard to keep your glucose where we wanted it to. So your fasting insulin, the fasting insulin of the 5-day challenge dropped down to almost a third. So that was actually a great change in terms of stress on the body. So the body's actually having to work less to keep the blood sugar where it's at. As a clinician, what actually excited me the most was the change in HSCRP. For those who are not familiar with CRP levels, it stands for C-reactive proteins. It is an indication of the inflammation in the blood vessels themselves and is also a biomarker for autoimmune conditions. Those autoimmune conditions include Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, heart disease. This is a biomarker that tells me how inflamed is the patient's body, how inflamed are their blood vessels, and how likely are they to have cardiac issues. More so than cholesterol. Here in America, we do focus a lot on cholesterol, but the problem with cholesterol is that we've never conclusively determined whether or not that actually is going to lead to having heart attacks. But we do know that diabetes and inflammation can lead to heart attacks. So when we saw the C-reactive proteins drop from almost 10 down to almost 3.5, we were really shocked because that's 5 days. And two of the patients who joined us in this journey, one had cancer and the other one has fibromyalgia. So their C-reactive proteins were very high because they have a known autoimmune condition and a known inflammatory condition. So everyone was pretty excited when their levels dropped so dramatically. So on average, that was about a 6.5 drop in the C-reactive protein. And what you're looking at is a significant decrease in your likelihood of having a heart event or having an inflammation inside of your body from the fibromyalgia or from the cancer. It's a wonderful indicator of the drop in inflammation that can occur in just literally 5 days. And the next inflammatory marker is C-peptides. C-peptides is telling us what the stress level of the pancreatic cells are, or the beta cells. The beta cells is what produces insulin in the body. On average, the average person began at 3.6, and in 5 days, the pancreatic stress dropped down by half, down to a little under 2. That's a dramatic decrease in stress for the pancreas, which means your body is much more efficient at keeping your blood glucose low. And keeping our blood glucose low and not having those nasty spikes of sugar decreases the stress overall on your body, as well as knowing that your body actually needed less insulin means that the organs are actually getting fed because they're becoming more sensitive to the insulin that your body's producing. So there's a lot more efficiency that occurred in those 5 days. HOMA-IR is a calculation of the fasting glucose and the fasting insulin. As I mentioned before, fasting insulin is what kept that fasting glucose at that given level. And HOMA-IR is telling us about the efficiency of the insulin and its ability to keep the glucose where it's presently at. And it began at 4.2, which is reasonably high, down to 1.15, which is a beautiful number. And like I said, between the C-peptide and the HOMA-IR, it's indicating to us as clinicians that the patient's pancreas is significantly less stressed and the body's resistance to its own insulin has dropped significantly. For hemoglobin A1C, we really didn't expect to change that much. For those who don't know what a hemoglobin A1C, it is an average. It is based off of the red blood cells. Red blood cells are made in the bones of the body and is released. Once they are released, the red blood cells live for about 3 to 4 months. And during those 3 to 4 months, the red blood cells will act as a historian for us. So what we do is we take the red blood cells, we tear it apart, we see how much sugar is attached to it, and that percentage we call the hemoglobin A1C, and it tells us on a daily average what the blood sugar was. And we weren't expecting that much of a change, but in 5 days, hemoglobin A1C went from 6 to 5.75, with roughly translating to a 10 to 15 point drop on a daily basis on blood sugar. Overall, as a clinician, I was actually really impressed at the alterations that can occur in 5 days. And this particular protocol can be done once a year, once a month, for 3 months, or even once a month for the rest of your life, just to keep your body in a corrected state. And so we were really impressed by the protocol. It's definitely something I'd recommend to several of our patients. I think ideal patients would be, of course, patients who suffer from metabolic conditions such as diabetes, any of our autoimmune condition patients, any of our women who suffer from polycystic ovary syndrome. There's a whole host of patients, I think, who could benefit from this. Of course, there's the aesthetics component. If anyone wants to lose weight, that's great. This is actually an incredibly healthy way of doing it. And the residual effects have afterwards been that most of us who did the program all say the same thing, that we're actually shocked to learn the difference between being hungry and eating simply out of habit. So this was a great awakening for several of us to be able to walk away from food at days after we finished the protocol, because we realized we weren't really that hungry. We just, out of force of habit, wanted to eat. And we were really, really excited by the results of this program. If you are interested in finding more about our protocol and finding more about us, feel free to contact us to find out if this protocol matches your needs. And if anything, I hope it inspired you to learn a little bit more about fasting protocols and about intermittent fasting and how it can benefit you from a metabolic point of view as well as from an aesthetics point of view, because it's great to look good and to be beautiful on the outside. But here at ThriveX, we always say that we want to focus on making you beautiful from the inside out. I hope everyone has a great day, and we are excited to offer this new protocol to our patients. Have a wonderful evening. Can you just rewind?